Kill Not Preach.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome, David Castillo. Welcome to our audience. This is another edition of Freedom Friday. Now, you'll notice that Chris is not here. He's handling business as always, so we're gonna continue the show. I put on Twitter today, like in Farsi, we would say, "Ogoye Chris, joy holiye oga." Yani ما نمیتونیم اینجا باشیم توی جای شما جای خالیه. And that basically means, like, you know what, Chris, your seat is empty. Like, no one can fill your space. But we got work to do, and we're going to still try to make sure that we carry on this tradition of Freedom Friday. So welcome, David. So great to be here. Glad to see you. And this is, I think this is a real treat for me because this is our second go around within a couple of weeks.
That's right. Thank you for having me. Honored to be here on Freedom Fridays. I'm a regular viewer of the show. As you know, it's a little bit earlier out here on the West Coast. So generally Fridays I wake up with you all having my coffee. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. It was great seeing you in person a couple of weeks ago in New Orleans, and yeah, we've had a couple of recent podcasts and shows together. Today's talk.
Yeah, no, most def. And we thought today that we'd really talk about what, I know in the 70s growing up, but often hear about the black and brown get down and, collaboration, and whether it was, of course, I heard a lot about it from the context of the Black Panther Party and the original Rainbow Coalition in Chicago and elsewhere, but also would hear about it as a youth, as far as like Black studies, Chicano studies, and other ways that people were advocating and pushing for, inclusive curriculum, respectful, accurate curriculum. And it's interesting today we see this, anti-teaching truth, anti-Black, anti-brown, aggression in schoolhouses, in policy houses, in boardroom, everywhere, right? So in society at large. So I think now more than ever, we have to like revisit some of the principles that we stood on when we were in unified efforts with a common enemy that was, had contempt for all of us, but then there are ways that contempt, sometimes we learn best from our oppressors, which is most unfortunate, right? But like, that's what we experience. And then we, unfortunately use that against each other. So, I know we were going to talk about education, but wanted to just get your, just high level view of Black Brown Get Down. What, when did you first see it, witness it, experience it, etc.?
Yep. Yeah. Thank you. So I grew up in Southern California, in San Diego, in a neighborhood called Linda Vista, and it was essentially a Black and brown neighborhood. So that was like the communities that I grew up in. Were definitely predominantly Latino, mainly Mexican American and African American. So those are the schools that I went to. It was just part of the culture that I grew up in. And went through K-12 schools like many of us did. And man, I could count, on my fingers the number of times that I learned something about my own home culture in school, and that would be zero. And it was, I still made it through, and it wasn't until I hit my first year of community college. I was a community college student initially, and then transferred to university. But, literally my first semester in community college, I enrolled in a Chicano studies course at Mesa College, and it just lit a fire because it validated so much of what I was learning from my home culture and the stories of my parents. And it just, I didn't know that these things were possible in an educational setting. And that was pretty much it for me. I ran the course list. I took all the Chicano studies courses I could. And I took several courses in the African American studies department too, in the Black studies department at Mesa College. So I think that's kind of where I in an educational setting, saw the Black-Brown Get Down, the collaboration, for essentially, two departments that were growing, but were fighting like hell for resources against a larger system that didn't quite understand why brown and Black students needed to understand history from their own people's perspective. I mean, I think that's the first time. And then just a quick story. I always talk to my elders and my ancestors and my uncles and my aunts and my tios and tias. And one of my mother's sisters caught one of my shows, the other show that we do with Dr. Cole and Omar. And she called me on the phone and she says, "So self-determination, huh?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, in the late 60s, early 70s, I was living in California in Los Angeles. She's from Texas. And she says, I was part of the Brown Berets, and we used to hang out with the Black Panthers in LA and Angela Davis. I had no idea, right? This is my aunt. This is like 50 years ago or something, telling me that she was a Brown Beret, and she used to hang out with Angela Davis and the Black Panthers in Los Angeles. And it blew my mind. I'm like, I got to document that. I got to document that story.
Please do. Please do.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's so many, just stories like that, right? Like that it was community, it was homegrown. I love that, once you were exposed to Chicano studies, how you went all in. And I think that's one of the biggest disconnect. Everybody's like, oh, home and homeschool associations. And like, there's a chasm between how children are looked at in homes and how they may be looked at in schools. What's taught at homes and what's taught in schools. This idea that kids are broken in their homes and they come to school to be whole, when it's often the exact opposite. Like, kids feel loved, they feel confident, they feel grounded at home. Then they go to school, and that's where the breakage happens. And then they got to go back, and their families got to wrap around them and exert enormous amount of energy to kind of piece them back together, only to go back in the lion's den, on a day-to-day basis for 13 years. But I love how you said, once you got a whiff of it and you're like, oh, this resonates, then you just went all in. You were like, that whole cradle to the grave type of idea is absolutely fabulous. And you mentioned teachers in schools. That would would love to, maybe we show a clip, because we've been talking about this Black teacher pipeline. And interesting enough, there have been several students who identify as Latino, Latinx. I want to get into that too, the designation, Latino, Latinx, Hispanic. There's been a lot of in our community conversations around that. So I'd love for you to dive into that in a little bit. But we've had students who participated, some who identify as Afro-Latino, and then others who identify as Latino, but say, you know what, when I'm going to the regular educator prep program, I'm only going to learn about white educational theorists, white behavior theorists. I actually want to know what's a Black teaching pedagogical framework, what's a Black historical lens, so I can just be smarter in how I educate and how I mesh these ideas as I develop my own paradigm. So we have a clip here that was on actually this morning on a Philly channel, Fox 29 Philly, with Sister Shana Terrell, who's our director of pipeline programming, and she gets to introduce Trent Petty, who came in through our program. He was a paid apprentice, and now he's in his first year teaching coming this fall. So he did like a classroom assistant this year, and now he'll be transitioning. He actually had his own classroom this year as well. So let's play this, and then I want to dive into some of how you're looking at Latino teachers, Latinx teachers, and the roles that they have, because very similar numbers, particularly when you look at males as well, men as well, who are leading classroom. All the numbers are very, very similar.
And yes, we are going to celebrate nurses next week. Okay. We spotlight a program making national news and changing lives. The Black Teacher Pipeline Project is what it's called.
Now, nationally, more than 15% of students are Black, but Black teachers make up only 7%.
Right.
And when it comes to Philadelphia, nearly half of the student body identifies as Black, but Black teachers only make up 24% for Black educator development.
Yeah.
So Karen Hepp is live now at a Master Charter Prep Elementary School in North Philadelphia with more on what they're doing to try to help solve this problem.
Hi, Karen.
Hi. Well, they're changing lives for kids, for students, and for our school system. It's amazing. So Shayna Terrell Brown, good morning, one of the co-launchers of this program. And let's just shout out some numbers at people for the difference of having a person that looks like you in the classroom, specifically if you're a child of color having a teacher. What kind of difference can that make by the numbers in terms of, say, let's graduation? What kind of difference can it make?
Huge difference. 32% more likely to graduate from college, 29% less likely to actually drop out of school. Black teachers absolutely can make a difference in all children's lives.
How about when it comes to some things like, even like discipline or violence? Does that make a difference as well?
It makes a huge difference. When children have people in their lives who look like them, who understand them, and who are ready to be advocates for them, it completely decreases the amount of times they can be suspended in school, the amount of times they feel outcasted, the amount of times they feel more connected to the community. But they have an advocate, more likely to be recommended for AP classes, more likely to be recommended to do some of those things that they would get ousted because of how others may look at them.
And it's one of the single biggest differences that you can make is having a person that sort of reflects you in terms of understanding. What you're doing is you're creating it. If you want to make something, like you just bring it up, you have this pipeline. So you're reaching people where they are that may want to go into education in high school, in college. Tell me about the center that you created.
Yes, so the Center for Black Educator Development is committed to the training, recruitment, and supporting the hiring of Black teachers. We are creating and rebuilding the Black teacher pipeline. We have apprentices programs. One of our flagship programs is Freedom Schools Literacy Academy. We run them every summer between Philadelphia and Camden. Right now we have 5 sites. In Detroit, we'll be launching our very first site. But with these programs, we encourage young people to teach. We connect teaching to social justice as a way for them to be able to give back to their community, understand teaching is a revolutionary act. That's the broader view. The lower view, in terms of how we really help folks navigate this pipeline, there are a lot of hurdles to getting into education. Financial barriers, a lot of different loopholes, people not sure how to apply for certifications or where to go. So we help them with that.
So let's meet one of the people that's in the program right now. This is teacher Trent Petty. Good morning to you. Thank you. And it's so important, specifically, we have so few Black men that are in teaching. So I'm sure you can see with your own eyeballs the difference that you're making in people's lives. So you are what they call an apprentice. This is your classroom, your first and second graders. Why are you called to teaching?
I am called to teaching because I feel as though, just like Shayna said, and the center's statement, there's a huge disparity in Black male teachers. I know growing up in Pittsburgh, I unfortunately was not able to have any Black male teachers. So I'm trying to do something and improve the lives of all the students that are coming behind me and really trying to make a difference in terms of education.
It's like if you see it, you can be it.
Yes.
And the kids can see that when they look up at you, it could be my future. I could do anything that I want to do. What do you try? What are the, what's the message that you have for your kids?
The message that I have to all my kids is if you want to pursue anything or be anything, just stay at it. One of the greatest pieces of advice that I got is it's not the smartest or the fastest, it's the ones who last the longest. So I try to instill resiliency in all my kids and let them know that even on their bad days, you can still be whatever it is that you want to be.
Well, we're really grateful that you're here in the school, and we have obviously we're up here at the Mastery Charter Prep. We're right next to Simon Gratz, also a Mastery school by the high school, in case you want to know. So let's meet some of your kids over here, and you can help tell me about them. Destiny is drawing a picture. Destiny, what's one of your favorite things that you had? That was what I asked them as their assignment from your house. What are you drawing for me?
I'm drawing my favorite little kitty cat.
I love it. What's some of your favorite things about first grade?
My favorite things about first grade is Mr. Petty, Mrs. Vada, and all my friends around me.
Oh, that's great. Aiden, how about you? What's it like being in this classroom with your teachers?
Good.
What are you drawing for me?
A spider.
Why you like spiders? Or are they just fun to watch?
Fun to watch.
And you also draw watching TV, and you have a cat. What are some of the other favorite things that you have? Wait, I see a picture right there. Tom, you have to see this as well, and everybody. You going to school? I asked you to draw your favorite things. Why is it fun for you to go to school?
So I can learn, have fun with my friends, and have fun with Mr. Petty.
What do you think that's special about having Mr. Petty?
Well, what's fun about having Mr. Petty is he give us fun things to do. He give us coloring sheets. He let us get on Epic.
I love Epic. That's a great learning tool for kids that are in the 1st and 2nd grade. And these are our 7th and 8th graders. Aria, beautiful name, beautiful girl. Oh, I love the book that you're reading. Can you show me what's the book that you're reading right now?
I love my hair.
Oh, what a great book. I think that's wonderful. What do you like about school, or what are some of your favorite things?
I love to be with my teachers and my friends.
What makes them so special?
They help me.
Well, thank you. And then King, last but not least, good morning to you. How are you? You drew, tell me what you drew.
I drew a fish tank.
With 3 happy smiling fish. Do you fish at home? Yeah. Well, these are some of the great kids in the 1st and 2nd grade classroom. So we have a change. This is something that's going to be a national program. Oh, you already are national. Let me just say that. So you're helping kids and people all around this entire country. How many states are you in right now?
Right now, we are in 3 states. We're in Philadelphia, we're in Pennsylvania, we're in New Jersey, and then we're in Michigan. But we have a very ambitious goal to be in 10 states in the next 10 years.
Keep it up.
We will. Yes, rebuilding the Black Teacher Pipeline. We love your support. Please visit the center at www.thecenterforblacked.org. Donate, apply to our programs, spread the word, people, please.
Preach that, spread the word. All right, Mike and Alex, back inside to you.
Yeah, so there's that was this morning. Shout out to Sister Shayna Terrell, who you can also catch on Thursdays at noon on Building the Black Educator Pipeline podcast every Thursday at noon. She's 50-something episodes in collaboration with Education Post, and so we're really grateful. This yesterday was with our resident doctor, Dr. Greg Carr. If you're not following him on Twitter, Africana Carr, you're missing out, and we talk about learning from the cradle to the grave. He's part of that cradle to the grave timeline that you need to be on. But David, as I mentioned, we have we've had teacher apprentices as well as students. We're in Camden, New Jersey, very heavy Latino population, and even the idea of Freedom Schools Literacy Academy. The Aspira and other communities of that are Latinx have hosted freedom schools on their own for years. And so this tradition, I even met some Native American person who said, yeah, we also had something very similar to freedom schools. They were called treaty schools, where we would instill our culture, our community. That young lady was reading a book that my daughters have, I Love My Hair, right? Which I think is not just who leads the classroom, but how they influence the curriculum, as well, the ecosystem at large, right? And so we'd love just to hear, your reaction to that, but also your experience with having conversations with, Latino teachers and the need for far more Latino teachers as well.
Yep. Thank you, and congratulations on the work at the center. I've seen some of the recent press, and they're just putting the camera, up to the work that you're doing, and it also sounds like you've got some pretty ambitious growth plans. So that's great. That's great, expanding the work. So I think going back to my story that I shared a while ago, when I was in my first year of college, community college, and enrolled into a Chicano studies class. Again, that moment where I saw myself, I saw my family's history in curriculum, right? These things I'd been hearing about from stories that have been passed down, and all of a sudden it's like it's codified in literature that we're reading in the class. So that happened after I graduated from high school, obviously, and my whole rationale for eventually going back and becoming a teacher and working in communities like San Francisco and Oakland, California, was to ensure that students didn't have to wait until they got to college, if they made it to college, to have that fire go off, right? So like, what does it look like if we can do this in a high school setting 20 something years ago and build out, a homegrown, authentic, connected to the community and the history of the community ethnic studies program. And so that's what we did at the high school that I founded in East Oakland, California, called Oakland Unity High. Still there, still doing great things. But that was the goal.
Wait a
It's
minute,
like,
and don't gloss over that. You founded a
Yep.
school. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like that's so important. So I wanted you to continue, but I don't want that to just get glossed over, because we talk about not only, we talk to our youth about not only leading classrooms, but leading classrooms, leading schools, starting schools, and other, learning centers. So that is fantastic.
Yeah, and it was definitely, it was kind of in the Wild West days of charter schooling. There weren't so many like supporting organizations around, and we literally, had to figure out so much on our own. But we understood what the mission was, and we were all aligned to the mission. And that's what we did, and it was it was over 20 years ago. Like, again, the school is still there, it's doing very well. And so that's, my impetus to like become an educator, become a school leader, become a school founder, was to make sure that students could have those authentic experiences where they see themselves in the literature, they see culturally relevant and competent and affirming curriculum and activities, and that's what we did. What we also did, connecting to your work, I believe, is sort of organically, we were one school, then we turned into two schools, and then we had a third school. But one of the things that we just kind of sort of stumbled upon was growing our own educators from the ranks of our community, from the ranks of our alumni, from the ranks of people that would come and work in the after school program.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these moves you're seeing different states and big districts figuring out now. We said, we have people in the building. They know our kids. They know our community. They're from the community. So let's figure out how we can put them on some kind of pathway towards a degree or a credential, whatever it might be. I was in Oakland a couple of weeks ago, and I got to visit my old classroom where I taught. And, I looked over, and where I would be standing in my classroom, one of my former advisees was now teaching there with a credential, right? It was like, wow,
that's amazing, right? Like,
yeah. So I think, it's that. I think the one thing, that we could have in common around, the work that you're doing and the work that we need to do to hire more brown teachers. I'll share some statistics in a second here. Is like, look right in front of us, right? Look in our classrooms, look in our communities, look at our parent communities, our caregiver communities, to identify the talent that is essentially sitting right in front of us. But obviously the hurdles of going through this step of becoming a teacher is can be very daunting for anybody. So
it's been bureaucratized, it's been monetized,
crazy.
It's been just nuts, just absolutely nuts in so many different so many different ways. And then you're talking about so many of our people from our community are first gen college goers too. So not only do they have bills that they may not have experienced before because they're first gen going, right? Like then there's all of these it's different between being, when you're like invited into somewhere, right? Invited into someone's home. If I invite you into my home, but yet I put the desk at the door, I put I don't really totally unlock the gate. I pour some oil on the ground in front of it, and it's like, come on in, you're welcome, right? Like that. That's one thing. And I feel like that's how people are right now being invited into the profession. Not only, and we didn't even talk about like that people aren't even thinking about how to retain, right? Like they're just like, acting like they're on a safari hunting that elusive black and brown educator. Like, whoa, look at that magical young man walking down the street in the barrio. Let us grab, right? Like, there ain't no safari jack. Like, this is our community already, right? And so if there were less barriers, particularly those barriers that don't show that they have any evidence that it creates student achievement, or it makes it a better teacher, but it's just somebody's making money off of it. Somebody's, yeah. So I would say that's a huge part. That's a huge
Yep.
part.
Yeah, I went through a university-based teacher credentialing program and a university-based admin credentialing program. So
Mhm.
I hear what you're saying. I lived it twice.
Yeah.
I think so. Another thing I wanted to call out is some of the data that you've been sharing and some of the research that's out there. I think we can say today the data is clear, right? If children have one or two or three Black teachers at some point in their K-12 education, these numbers, double-digit percentage points of 30%, for good things to happen, or 30% for bad things to not happen. Looking at kids staying in school and graduating in big numbers, the data is clear. And so I think one of the one of the challenges. So that was your school in that clip. That was your former school.
No, that's one of our partner
Okay.
schools. Yep.
Okay.
That's a
Okay.
partner school. So
All
it's this idea of Black teacher pipeline. We have the
Yep.
high school and college youth who teach first, second, and third graders after school and in the summer. And then eventually they work there. So they've already built relationships. They've, maybe even attended there as elementary school students. And so Trent has been in our program. And so then they hired him as, part of hey, they're not only just getting a certification, but he's kind of getting community certified, right? Because there's plenty of folks who go to school, go to these programs, and they learn how to work in systems, or they learn how to work in schools. But it's a difference between knowing how to work in schools and knowing how to work in communities.
Absolutely.
And we focus on how do you work in communities, respect communities, partner with them, have goals that are arranged based off of their goals, all that type of thing. So.
Yep. And so I think one of the at the same time that I see it happening in certain districts, even in California, they're talking about changing some of the credentialing requirements to open up the field. The work that you're doing and others are doing, tons of opportunity and actually evidence that you're making change. And I think at the same time, we know one of the biggest challenges, because when I was a teacher and a principal, we would ask students about what they want to do. We'd walk them through kind of a career pathway, sort of, what do you see yourself in 2 years and 5 years, when they're like in the 11th and 12th grade. And the one thing, that would come up for them, and they're in a school that, where they're generally happy, they feel a sense of connection and bonding. Number one, like, why don't you want to become a teacher? I'm asking a high school senior, and they're like, because I grew up poor and my parents want, and I want to make money, like the money's just not there. Right. So there was that piece of it. And then the other piece, which we heard some from students, but you and I know this, like for the students that are in schools, unlike the school that we just saw in the clip, where every day is a struggle and kind of like, kids, are getting beat down, and it's like, why would that child then say, I want to go and work in that kind of an environment or setting? That's a big ask to make of someone. And I think the big challenge is like, how do we, we have to do both things at the same time. We need to work to create better conditions in all of our schools for Black and brown children. And that in turn will probably, hopefully increase the percentage of students that then want to go back into those settings because, they see that they were impactful, right?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And this it's so important that our schools be safe, right? Not just physically, but culturally. A lot of times people are like, oh, school safety, and they think about kid on kid, fights and things like that, right? And they're like, oh yeah, physical safety. We got to stop kids from fighting, and totally ignoring that a lot of the unsafe environments is because children, particularly children of color, are not safe intellectually, culturally, emotionally, spiritually. Like that's the violence that's waged on them nonstop. They're not in every second of the day. You know what I mean? If they're in school for 7 hours and 4 minutes, they're not fighting for 7 hours and 4 minutes, but they can be intellectually oppressed for 7 hours and 4 minutes. They can be culturally oppressed for 7 hours and 4 minutes. Multiply that by 185 days a year, multiply that by 13 years. that can happen every moment, right? And our friend Dr. Chris Emden, he would come to our convenings, and he would often speak about sometimes recruiting Black and brown youth to become teachers or come work in schools is like recruiting someone to return to the scene of a crime
Absolutely.
against themselves. And so, like, with that kind of experience, it has to be something. That's one of the reasons why we also spend time doing developing like cultural competencies and providing professional development, particularly for school leadership teams, not just the principal who's one person and got all the staff and, but leadership teams who are dispersed around the school, who are holding and protecting the culture or the bar that they claim that they're about. At some point, we want to be able to like give them like badges so we can tell the apprentices that we've developed and spent time and resources developing, saying like, hey, here's a school that we are kind of giving a badge to, that they are the environment is safe space for Black and brown children, as well as you as a nascent Black and brown educator, right? Like, and so that folks know, like, hey, you know what? We talk about like right seat on the right bus in places. Well, right school is also absolutely imperative. And when you look at, just the vitriol about teaching truth, about teaching contributions, because they protecting whiteness and protecting white supremacy is basically saying Black and brown people are basically stowaways to civilization or stowaways to the society and the vision for society. They're like, no, it's not inclusive. You're a stowaway, so we don't need to include you. And teaching children that at a very young age is done in so many ways, right? Like, how are you lesson? What's your mind? We say mindsets matter most, and your mindset about how you're planning your lessons and your unit map, how you build relationships, how you create an environment and a feedback loop, with your students and families, all that will, it'll betray what comes out of your mouth. People fix their lips to say all type of stuff, but their mindset will still reveal itself, particularly in how children feel in that leadership. And educators should ask children, how are you experiencing my leadership? Because you're leading a classroom. That means you're a leader. You're leading a school. You're leading a grade team, a content team. Ask the people who are that you're working with and around and for, supposedly, how are you experiencing my leadership?
Yep. That's a serious, a step into the world of vulnerability, which, people should feel safe to do. I think going back to your earlier point around, we were talking about violence in schools, and when I said beat down, I actually was thinking both physically and intellectually.
I know.
Our systems are generally good at tracking physical violence in schools, but our systems do not track intellectual violence, right? That shows up in other places, and it's hard for people to make the connection. So I think, for aspiring teachers and aspiring leaders and systems leaders, reframing or rethinking, asking the question twice or three times around, what data am I not collecting at my school? It's like a data-rich environment, but are you actually getting the right data? So how can you actually start to dig in to what we're talking about, that sort of that intellectual violence that happens in too many schools for Black and brown children on a daily basis?
Yeah, I love that. Like, track it, they track physical violence, but the whole data system, their computers will blow up if they had started inputting intellectual violence, but it is absolutely critical to I love that, like actually doing that. We talk a lot about like auditing your classroom, auditing your school, and seeing, from a Black and brown's child's perspective, what are they seeing every day? Not only who are they seeing leading the classroom, school, grade, content team, school board, district, right? Who are the instructional coaches? What's the intellectual genealogy of who taught you to think about Black and brown communities that way? Who taught you to, and really have people sit like, how did I get to this conclusion? Dr. Ali Michael, she's a white woman out here in Philly. She does a lot of development for white educators. And one of the things that she's very transparent from, she's from Pittsburgh, and she said, she realized at some point she had to sit down and think about, wait a minute, where did I learn to think about people of color in this particular way? Right. And really start like thinking and unpacking of that. And I think so much of learning is, yes, it's reflection, but it also, as you mentioned, it also has to be some public learning too, right? Like that vulnerability and transparency. Like you can't just reflect on your own without participating in some type of feedback loop. And the folks that we usually ask the least about how they're experiencing are the students who are spending the most time with us, you know? And we're like, well, I taught it, right? Like that's how we can say I taught it, even if you didn't learn. I did my job, right? Because I'm not curious enough about how are you experiencing this? How are you absorbing this? What does it mean to sit in that seat and experience this all day long? You know, we've had educators around the country who do things like who will sit in it, just follow the child's roster, you know, and thinking about, you know, and they have like a framework that they're thinking about, like, and all day they try to see it from a child's lens. They're sitting in the child's seat, following them in the hallway, in the classroom, in the cafeteria, to and from school, with some particular questions of like, okay, how are they experiencing it? And then coupling that with asking them directly, right? And then you can have a better sense of what's the student's experience. And if some of their disengagement perhaps it's just, you know, a basic self-preservation, you know, basic self-preservation of just like, you know what, I'm checking out because you guys are horrendous. And even if I don't have the words for it, my body, my spirit is reacting in a way that I'm like, yo, this ain't good for me.
Yeah.
You know, this ain't good for, despite what their mouth says, this ain't good for me.
Yep. And then those shadowing activities can be very, very powerful for adults. I think you know, like you said, you observe the same thing, but you observe it in different ways. And you know, you could think, well, that was a very well executed lesson. You ask the child, and they have a very different perspective of how they're receiving that information, right? So yeah, those walkthroughs can be very you can learn a lot if they're done the right way.
Yeah, if they're
Shadowing
done the right way.
activities.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I mean, and I think that's the important part of it, because sometimes people just want to haphazardly, oh yeah, I just did a, like, no, it needs to be carefully thought about, planned, getting feedback early on from different stakeholders, and particularly students, about what should I be looking for, you know, and
Yep.
then later ask them, what should I start, stop, and continue doing? And no matter what grade level they are, like you just ask it at a more sophisticated way. But even a kindergarten, first grader can talk to you about their experience, you know. And we,
Yep.
you know, we've spoken about this on the show before, you know, even encouraging families not to just to say, you know, how was your day, but really asking, like, when did you feel the most respected? You know, and you know, what class, what time, when do you feel the most whole? When do you feel loved? When do you feel the most anxious? At what part? Is it a, you know, the particular incident that happened, or is it a consistent pattern of where you feel the most anxious? You know, and asking those type of questions that can be responded in ways other than good, it was all right, nothing, you know, what'd you learn today? Nothing, or something, right? Like kind of really probing to learn about what the experience of our children are with people that we may not know, people that we may not even trust, people we may not even like, right? And so how do we and if we do this enough, and if the school and the community within that should be built, if they're being humble enough and have that servant leader orientation, then they're also making sure that they are working to build this trusting environment that families can say, oh yeah, we're on the same page.
Yep.
You know, we're on the same line, you know, and
Yep.
too often right now, we ain't even in the same book, right? Because how I talk about Black communities and Black contributions and Black history and people of color in my house, that may be very different than where my kids go and how they talk about those same things, whether verbally or through the curriculum, which also screams mindsets of not just who wrote the textbook, but also the person that's saying, like, yeah, this is what we're using. You know, this is what we're purchasing
Absolutely.
for your child.
Yeah. The power of you know, the value of being humble in a school, you said. I mean, that's like a gatekeeper, right? Like school leaders, teachers. I think humbleness can often get confused for indifference or inaction, but it's actually quite the opposite. It's like an opening door so that you can be prepared to, you know, have those feedback conversations, and you know, sometimes sitting with people, like you said, that you might not like, but like, or your focus is on the children, right? And so
Yeah, yeah.
when you
I
said
mean, I
that
think
word, it kind of triggered something in me.
100%. I mean, I think, I was raised to look at humility as a way to actually become emboldened. You actually become smarter about like your work. You become emboldened. Your spine gets steeled if you approach it with a level of humility, because that's how you learn, right? You know what I mean? Because you're actually, the person who speaks makes more mistakes than the person who listens. And so like being in a having a mindset to where like, oh yeah, I'm actually learning, I'm curious, that can actually, that strengthens your resolve in so many ways. Like, you talk about like self-determination, like, absolutely, because hey, I have a better understanding now, and now I can actually lean forward. And then I'm going to ask you again some more to give me feedback. Then I'm going to lean forward, right? Like, man, that can generate a pretty healthy level of confidence to do this absolutely important work, which is different than arrogance that people often come into our work with because they haven't listened. The difference between confidence and arrogance is probably how much did you listen and learn, from the people who you claim to want to serve.
Yep. If it's okay with you, before we get to time, I'd like to share some data points, big
Yeah,
picture data
please do.
points. So like
Yeah.
connecting, I've been thinking about the work that you are doing at the center, and then looking at again some state-based or district-based ways of credentialing in different ways to cast a wider net. And so I'm sitting in California. More than half of the students in our public schools in California are Hispanic. I know we were going to get into the Hispanic, Latinx, Latino thing, but that's another show. I don't want to get too worked up this early in the morning.
Right. All right. We definitely got to bring you back so we could dive into that. So yes,
Yeah.
please.
So we got about 55% of our kids are brown in California public schools, with a teacher percent coming in at 21%. So from 55 brown students to 21 brown teachers across the state. Challenge, yet a major golden opportunity to rethink how credentialing is done, and to rethink what educators can look like in our classrooms. There's a specific piece there around bilingual teachers and that certification. There's some history here in the state around a couple of propositions that took bilingual ed away for a while, and now it's back. And so it's like rebuilding that pipeline of bilingual educators. And again, in California as a whole, in public schools, 23% of our students are white, and teachers that are white come in at 61%. So 23 to 61, right? There's a pretty big gap there. So, the data in California is pretty, that's what I have in front of me right now. It is what it is. Obviously challenging for, children in classrooms when they don't have teachers that look like them, but also, interested to see which ways we could work together, across our university systems and other credentialing entities to change that. I think one bright spot, which I'd like to bring forward, always like to bring a shining example forward, is a school district that I worked within, the boundary of Oakland Unified, has actually done some very powerful work at recruiting African American teachers. So you do have a kind of a demographic that is shrinking in Oakland of African American people in general, and that's reflected in the school district. But right now, there are about 22% of students in OUSD are African American, and they've actually achieved a teaching force that is 20% African American. So you see a level of parity there, right? And so I want to make sure as we're, calling out areas where we see big gaps and there's, enormous challenges, that school districts, there's actually there are bright spots, and like we do in teaching, we allow exemplar teachers to teach their peers, and we learn from that. I know, and I would hope that the Oakland Unified School District is in a place where, they're able to talk about and share how they've actually achieved that, primarily with Black students and Black teachers.
Yeah, 100%. And I think those bright spots are absolutely important because there's so much to learn from, and I think we don't, we talk about like teachers being siloed, schools are siloed, districts are siloed, right? Like, nonprofits are like so many times when if we combine forces, like, that's the way to go, like Isaiah Walker here at one of the KIPP schools has so many, men of color, Black men in particular, in his school. It's radically different than the rest of the Philadelphia area, and even nationwide statistics. Aaliyah Bradley, principal of Mary McLeod Bethune School here in North Philly, and one of the most under-resourced, communities in the city, in a city of under-resourced communities, has such a vibrant, diverse teacher population, including men, that is just astounding, but that's not, it's, the district as a whole and many schools within the district pale in comparison, to what they're doing, how they're thinking about it. When you look at Friendship Charter in DC and how they're thinking about a teacher pipeline, or Boys Latin, that Dave Hardy founded and Dr. Will Hayes is leading, again, what their mindset, what the leadership mindset is around diversity, but not just who's leading the classroom, but just the intellectual space, and is it conducive for retention, right? Because ultimately, you can recruit, but if you've not thought about, am I inviting people into a hostile work environment, which often it's like having a factory and it's dangerous as hell. People's fingers are getting chopped off and stuff, but all you do is just like, I ain't worried about that. I'm just worried about recruiting. I just need to crank these whatever widget is out. I don't care about OSHA. I don't care about safety. I don't care about intellectual stimulation. I'm just like, just come. And I think
our numbers are good.
Our numbers are good, right? Like, and when you lead from Excel spreadsheets instead of leading, with people, that's what happens. So I do have a little bit of fear. The other fear that I have, and I would love to hear, anything that gives you pause and things that keep you up at night. But one of the things I fear, besides the idea of recruitment and not working to retain, is this idea of we're not going to change any of the conditions, the working conditions of schools. We're just going to recruit more people of color, right? So I'm not going to address lead, vermin, dilapidated buildings, lack of resources, funding. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to just recruit and then say, all right, have at it, because y'all do make an impact. So, okay, here, I'm not going to change any policies. It's just like, hey, come in and fix the sinking ship, as opposed to what's a healthy environment, because if it's healthy environment for educators of color, then it's also going to be, it's like kind of all ships lift in a rising tide type of thing, right? And so that universal design of, hey, who are the most marginalized group of educators, and how do we address the things that marginalize them, that we, participate, are complicit, and sometimes gleefully behind their marginalization? How do I address that? And so I'm a little nervous that people are not thinking about some of their policies, some of their funding mechanisms, right? Because we talk about district to district chasms in funding. There's under-resourced schools within the same district that are down the block from each other, depending on the demographic of those students. So those are two things: the retention piece, and then just like, we don't care about like all the other conditions that make it far more challenging than it should be. We're just going to recruit, right? And they're talking about like that invisible tax. Some of that tax is pretty conspicuous. It ain't invisible at all,
Yep. It'll make you sick, if you breathe too much of it. I mean, I've taught and led in those schools, where, we just didn't have the resources. And so we did what we needed to do, on the teaching and the non-physical environmental side, to create good learning conditions for children. But I agree with you. It's everything from the physical grounds to the the human systems in the school. And so I agree with you. I think putting, if schools aren't addressing both the physical and non-physical environments, as you're looking to shift your demographic of who's teaching in your schools, you're essentially putting good people into a bad system, and you're gonna have a retention problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's, there's work that schools should be doing to, I mean, really constantly, and this is a word that gets used in a wrong way, but, constantly in a state of reform. People talk about ed reform as a camp or, this bigger thing. But if you're a teacher, you're constantly reforming your lessons. If you are, an aide, or if you are everybody in schools is always, they're always responding to the climate, right? And so you are constantly changing and reforming, right? And so we need to think about, as we're shifting, hoping to shift, moving more educators that look like children in our schools, we have to rethink all those systems too. You have to rethink professional development. You really have to rethink, how you're supporting, teachers that may be coming in and may make up, 10% or 20% of the teaching demographic, right? I've been that one kid in the school where you're like, part of a very small demographic. It's the same for educators. We got to create, systems, or if it's like affinity groups, that are actually supported via the school's resources and time with professional development. I think coaching is really important, making sure that new educators that are coming in are not just, receiving support in and around like lesson planning and all of those things that are important, but also, just the metaphysical side of teaching, right? And making sure that people are okay, and that they're able to ask for help and get the resources that they need. I think one of the other things that we haven't talked about on this episode, which I want to bring up now, is one of the powers of having teachers and school administrators that look like community is that you really unlock the power of school to home collaboration. We talk about like engaging your community, right? We are the community. So it really, unlocks the ability of schools to, hopefully be authentic with their community, and for the community to be authentic with the schools. So I think as schools are able to shift their demographics, like if you don't change how you engage your community, your teaching staff and your people are changing. So you also have to think about, how you can how that impacts your ability to deepen the engagement with your community, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm so glad you brought that up. And also, are there groups that are supporting, Latino educators, both aspiring as well as, veteran? I know Latinos for Education are doing a lot of work, in policy and PD spaces.
Yep.
The Latinx Education Collaborative, Edgar down in KC is doing great work. Are there others that you know about that people can plug into, as well as organizations like the center can collaborate with?
Yep. I'm familiar with the names that you just brought forward. I think, the challenge right now is it tends to be a patchwork of people doing work across very specific regions, right?
Okay.
There is some exciting work that could potentially be coming out of California, around, like I said, some of the changes in the way that we credential and license teachers. I think coming out of the pandemic, we're coming out of the pandemic and we're rethinking everything, right? And I think it's coming
at least we're
at
supposed to be, right?
We're supposed to be, yeah. And we should be rethinking about how we, move people through this very laborious process. Can we still get the good end result, and have it not cost as much, and maybe cut the time it takes in half? And so I think there's some university-based systems that are doing work in California. I know the CSU is our big, California State University is our big state network that teaches teachers. And then you're also seeing some of the non-university based, like the Fortune School for Education, right? Some of these non-university attached programs that are rethinking how to do teacher credentialing based on, you know, the specific demographics that teachers are going to be going into.
Yeah. All right. Well, I know we're wrapping up to closing thoughts. One of the things I would love you to include is, we believe mindsets matter most, and even if you are from the communities, we know that people have often, as I said earlier, we learn from our oppressors, unfortunately too well sometimes. And, we may have internalized an unhealthy level of self-hatred or internalized racism that we unleash on on vulnerable folks in front of us. We may develop a classism type of thing. I was and I shared this before on both A Black Hands and Freedom Friday, that when I was years ago, I read a book called Up South, and it talked about how unwelcoming some Black Philadelphians were to Black folks who were moving up here through the Great Migration, and how we were developing our own kind of intra racial caste system, based off of geography, based off of access, based off of, oh, this is only, it's only one penny and it's mine. It can't be yours. It cannot be shared type of thing. So how, I would love to, as part of, and anything else that you want to bring up, but would love to hear your thoughts about, that as well, how to engender and develop and maintain. We also believe that it's a continuum. All our PDs are not just about reaching culture proficiency and you staying there no matter who you are, but that it's a continuum. And you could be culturally proficient with this particular child on this particular day, and they be culturally destructive the very next period or the very next day with the same child or a different child. Right. And so it's not a place that you arrive. It is, and I'm so glad you brought up this idea of reform and how it's a movement, because when I became a teacher, my aunt talked about, the importance of Islah. Like that's an Arabic term for Islah means, it means reform, but it's bigger than that, right? Like it means like refining, so to speak. And that's what, as a teacher, she said, that's what you should be doing all the time. As an educator, you should be doing that all the time. It's almost like this purification of not just like your lesson plans, but your own spirituality as well. Right. And so this Islah, you know what I mean? Like I remind myself about that a lot, because Mama Shakur, told me that this is, and it resonated. But we'd love to hear, what your, closing thoughts are on this beautiful Freedom Friday, May 6th, 2022.
Yeah. Thank you. So a very quick 20-second story. My parents were farm workers. Neither one, my father eventually got his GED and my mother did not. So, they grew up very poor in South Texas, picked every kind of fruit and vegetable, pretty much across 30 states, and so eventually settled in California and San Diego. And in around the 1970s, we had an influx of immigrants that were being forced out of Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, as a result of war, right? And I remember one day my parents were complaining about our new neighbors that had moved in, a Vietnamese family, because they were growing corn in their front yard. They're like, look at those people, they're growing the corn in the front yard. And I'm like, listen to yourselves. This is exactly what our white neighbors said when we moved into this neighborhood, and you're just trying to push it downhill, right? So, class is a hell of a drug. I'm with you on that. But me personally, I think, we all have to do this work and take none of it for granted. Even though I was raised, and I'm considered Hispanic, Latino, Mexican American, Chicano, I come from a very specific place and a time. And, my family's essentially been in the United States before it was the United States, right? So we've been here for a long time, right? This is our land. And when I go and when I work in schools, I know that I'm working with children and other adults that, we check off the same box on the census, but they have a fundamentally different world view and orientation than I do, even though we're both, maybe considered the same on paper. So I think as educators, as school leaders, like you said, you know, we're going in to do this work. You know, it's not a simple thing of matching the demographics. Like we've got to do the inner kind of race exploration, examination work, and reflect on a daily basis, and take nothing for granted and ask people for feedback. Because going back to your earlier point, you know, people are definitely experiencing all of us in a very different way than we think we are being experienced by those people, right?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And it goes back to what we both talked about earlier, is this level of humility. And if we approach that with a servant leader orientation, with this idea that we, you know, as Mary Church Terrell, one of my favorite Black educator Hall of Famers, used to talk about, we lift as we climb. And if we have that type of mindset, like I only win if you win as students or whoever, right? Like that I'm serving, and you win when I win, right? And so there's, we have a common goal to move forward on this path of liberation towards freedom. And I want to thank you again for being on. We hope we did our guy Chris Stewart proud, and you know, and thank you for continuing to advance this conversation about, you know, not only educational justice but racial justice as well, which is inextricably linked, you know, together. So you've been listening to another episode of Freedom Friday. We're glad to be back, and you still may not be free, but hopefully you're a little freer, a little clearer, and your spine is a little bit, you know, steeled, so you can be even more emboldened as we march and fight together on this path to freedom. Thanks again. Have a great weekend.